Hello and welcome. You are watching Big Picture with me, Vishal Dahiya, and today we're going to talk about subsidy reforms and fiscal position. In fact, recently the Finance Secretary TV Somanathan has pointed out and the need for bringing in subsidy reforms to ensure that the fiscal position of the government is improved. And he's talking about the food subsidy, the fertilizer subsidy and the farm subsidy as well. The idea is to go ahead and push those additional funds into infrastructure and education. Today we're going to talk about all aspects of this particular issue. And for more on this, we're joined by two distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Professor Arvind. Mohan is joining us from the Department of Economics in the University of Lucknow. And we're also joined by Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, consulting editor with the Business Standard. Welcome, both of you gentlemen. Let me begin with you first, Subhomoy, and let's start by understanding and making our viewers also understand a bit more about the current fiscal position of the government and also a bit more about subsidy.
Well, to put exactly in place what the Finance Secretary said, and I was listening to him, he said that subsidy reforms are necessary, which is an absolutely correct point, and it has been made over and over in several years by all finance ministers, all governments. The second point that he made was that it is also a fairly tough choice because subsidy is essentially, as we understand, while there are minor subsidies in lots of cases, the major subsidy is for food, fertilizer, and petroleum-linked products.
Mm-hmm.
Now, petroleum-linked products, the subsidy is almost over. On fertilizer and on food, there is a subsidy. And the food subsidy is rising. And in the current pandemic, also given the issues of inequality and all that, it is absolutely impossible to even conceive that there will be any change in the food subsidy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, any cut down. In fact, you can expect that on the basis of the National Food Security Act that was passed in 2013, the food subsidy will actually rise. It's already about 180,000 crore. Last year, the government has cleared the areas with Food Corporation of India, because of which it has actually gone up to something like 350 crore, but 350,000 crore. But even if you leave that out, the food subsidy isn't going anywhere. It will stay. And he also acknowledged that.
Okay.
The issue is about fertilizer subsidy. And fertilizer subsidy, the government is working on not to cut fertilizer subsidy to farmers. But what the government is saying is that we want the fertilizer subsidy to reach the farmers rather than be given to the companies. So what the government is trying out is a direct benefit transfer scheme to ensure that the fertilizer subsidy goes to the farmers directly. And we can talk about what are the modalities and how it's been working out.
Mm-hmm.
And once that happens, and the pilot projects have been on in some cases, the aggregate subsidy will cut down. But remember, this doesn't mean, and I want to make it very clear here, this doesn't mean that the government is saying that we'll raise the price of fertilizer.
Okay. Okay.
So that is these are the issues that should be understood very clearly.
Okay. So we've set up the points when we're talking about this particular issue, as you're pointing out, Subhomoy. Let me bring in Professor Arvind Mohan as well. Professor Mohan, as Subhomoy is pointing out, it is indeed a tough task. But then from your perspective, how crucial it is when we talk about subsidy reforms, and there has been a lot of debate on this, but given the current fiscal situation and also the fact that we are fighting a pandemic?
See, this is critical, crucial in many ways. First important reason why subsidy reforms are needed is that even in the budget, as it was put before the nation, it was indicated that total deficit is going to be close to around 12 lakh crores. Mm-hmm. And if you're also noticing various announcements which happened post-budget, they will also put some pressure on the fiscal situation. The chances are that the fiscal deficit as declared, 9.5% as was indicated, which at that point of time measured at 12 lakh crore, is going to be significantly higher than that. And that actually spoils everything. Before this, the worst economic crisis was 1991. At that point of time, total fiscal deficit was 7.8%. This year, the declared fiscal deficit itself is 12%, 9.5%, and is likely to be higher as we close the year. So I think this is a crucial issue, critical in many ways, which has to be addressed. We have seen that at the time of global meltdown, countries like UK, Germany, France, etc., they found it very difficult to handle subsidies of similar nature. So for a country like India, where pressures are many times bigger, it will be very difficult for India. That's one part of the story. But I think the more crucial issue is that what should be the nature of reform? If we are really wanting to reform, we will have to look at the larger gamut of subsidy. I will partly agree with the Secretary when he says that food, fertilizer, etc., these are the subsidies which we need to look at. They certainly are the larger part of the total subsidy structure, but there are many other kind of subsidies that we are providing. And unless you look at the complete basket, we will not be doing justice to the entire story.
Okay.
Now, for example, medical education, we are subsidizing this education significantly. For maybe a few thousand or 10,000 rupees, a student is able to get education, and that actually is not serving the purpose. That's one kind of subsidy. So whether it is schooling, whether it is medical education, and many other fronts, for example, there are many studies which suggest that even the corporate has been given continuous subsidy ranging into lakhs of crores per annum in terms of concessions which were extended, say in the form of a variety of taxes. So unless and until we start looking at the entire gamut of things, we might not be doing justice. This is the second part of the story.
Okay.
Third important issue is that as far as agriculture and the rural community is concerned, for more than 50 years, as a matter of fact, since 1950 till date, we have only been providing crutches to the economy, the rural economy, and not addressing the true issues. If you look at terms of trade, they have continuously remained against the interest of the rural community, agriculture in particular, and the allied activities. So we have only been providing subsidy, and that has only served as crutches. We have not moved towards true empowerment. I've been listening to slogans for decades now that agriculture needs to be treated as an industry. I think time has come when we are looking at subsidy reform. It has to be complete economic transformation. Agriculture in particular and most of the rural segments, including food subsidy, they truly are not needed if we are able to galvanize the economy. So the true economic reform in the rural segment has to be looked along with this important transition that we are looking at.
Okay. Okay.
Fourth thing that I'll want to flag at the outset is that when you are looking at subsidies, this is the most inefficient method of helping the poor. Subsidy, evidence suggests, is actually not helping the poor. So there can be better means of addressing that. We have experiments across the world, and we have experiments in India which have served better rather than the kind of subsidy. The vehicle of subsidy transfer that we are using at the moment is most inefficient and needs to change completely. Okay. All these things have to be looked into when we are looking at subsidy reforms.
Okay, and those are very quite important and significant points which you have brought out, Professor Mohan. Let me bring in Subhomoy on some of these, and let's take them one by one. Subhomoy, let's first, deal with the issue of entire gamut of subsidies, as Professor Mohan is pointing out. Do you agree that it's just not, when we talk about subsidies or subsidy reform, it should not be just about food subsidy or fertilizer subsidies? The entire gamut should be looked at, and ways have to be found to bring in holistic reforms in the subsidy regime.
Well, I mean, there can be no doubts about what Professor Mohan is saying, and those are definitely necessary. Now, there again, you have to look at what, in fact, Finance Secretary Somanathan was saying. There are different types of programs that the government does, and subsidy change or changing the nature of the way it reaches the poor or doesn't reach the poor is a very easy thing to do, changing it. it doesn't actually require the series of experiments that have been done, whether through, even if you look at what some of the very good work that has been done by Professor Vijay Banerjee and Duflo and Professor Esther Duflo and others have shown that there are extremely more what I might call useful ways, which Professor Mohan is also talking about, in which subsidy can actually be directed to the poor. In fact, the point is subsidy doesn't even need to go to the farmers.
Okay.
What we should understand is subsidy needs to go to the agricultural laborers because they are at the bottom of the pyramid. So the migrant laborers in towns or the agricultural laborers in rural areas, they are the ones who actually need the food subsidy. And they are the ones because their purchasing power is the weakest. But problem in changing the subsidy regime is not about how it can be done. The point is whether it can be done.
Okay.
Politically, very few governments can actually make out drastic changes in subsidy. And in that case, I must give credit to the current government that it has actually done a substantial amount of change in the subsidy regime. Unlike, say, a change in, say, education or a change in health, where you want to give extra expenditure, it's not clear how educational outcomes can be improved or health outcomes can be improved. It's actually fiendishly difficult. There are lots of things that needs to be done. But in subsidy, it is very easy to understand what needs to be done and what can be done.
Mm-hmm.
So while in education and health, and this is a very important distinction that needs to be understood, the ways in which government expenditure can be changed are difficult to figure out often. And yet there is political consensus that everybody says education and health reforms should be done. No political party will object to it. In subsidy, it is very easy to understand. It's very easy to do, but politically, it is very difficult to do. Most political parties will oppose it.
Okay.
And not just political parties in opposition or government, it is simply about the fact that in India, changing subsidy is a fraught exercise. As I said, the food subsidy that has been given, you might say that it can be better given as a food stamp, but which is efficient market, which goes on by the efficient market hypothesis. But it is not that easy to carry it out. There are lots of issues one needs to figure out.
Okay.
Similarly to fertilizer.
Okay, indeed, Subhomoy, how to do it is obviously one part, and whether or not to do it is also really, really important. But that is something which, as Professor Mohan is also pointing out, it seems very crucial right now that the top bureaucrats of the government are also underlying the need to bring in subsidy reforms there. Now, Professor Mohan, the question here, I'd like to take you back to how to go about it, because that also is very, very crucial, and you will have to, the government and those who are involved with the policy making changes will have to understand first as to how to go about it and its implications as well, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
See, I have two observations here. And before I come to those observations, I think when you try to do things in a simple way, things become very easy. I think it's not that difficult as we have been presuming at the political class, and the bureaucratic class has been shying away from it. Mm-hmm. Now, for example, if you're looking at health, what we observe and of late, at least in last one decade, and this has been the story year after year, almost 70% of expenditure in the health sector is coming from out-of-pocket expenses, meaning it is the poorest of the poor who's actually spending. For example, look at Uttar Pradesh. Almost 71% of the health expenditure, and this is more or less the story across the states in India, is out-of-pocket expense, where the poorest of the poor is spending and not getting appropriate care. 58% of this expenditure is actually traveling to what we call the jhola chap doctors, the inappropriate providers. Now, this is what we have not looked at. We have only been focusing on maybe maybe a couple of thousands of rupees, which the state is spending. I think in a sector like health, and for that matter even in education, this is a critical area of reform, because you are missing the dollar for penny. So you are only focusing on the penny and missing out the larger part of it. So you're maybe focusing on 13,000 crore and missing out 1 lakh crore.
Okay.
Try to reform that. Try to ensure that this part of expenditure is socialized. What we are actually calling subsidy today, say in the health sector, is truly no subsidy, because actually it is the poorest who is funding the entire health expenditure in many ways. So if you start looking at the total expenditure which is happening in the health sector across India, what the poorest is spending runs into lakhs and lakhs of crores. Please try to institutionalize it. You can completely withdraw whatever you are spending if you are able to institutionalize that. That is one. Similarly, there is critical scope, even at the rural area, at the cutting edge, say at the PHC level, at the community health center level, there is a critical scope of bringing in the private sector. We haven't done basic exercise for that. We don't even know the costing, how the public and the private sector will partner. So I think when you are looking at bringing down subsidy, look at the larger reform, it will immediately become more acceptable. Politically, see, I've always believed that good economics can only be good politics. So try to bring the two together here. Don't merely focus on subsidy alone. Look at the larger reform in the segment, which we have always been calling, say, the second generation reform. This is a critical area of second generation reform. That is one observation that I'll want to bring forward.
Okay.
Second important thing is that even when you are providing subsidy like food, etc., as I've already been saying that this is the most inefficient way of doing it, change the method. And there are two critical options. One of them happens to be experiments like vouchers. Issue vouchers to poorest of the poor. Allow them to buy food on the basis of that voucher. So the kind of administrative expenditure that you are putting on, say, Food Corporation of India, etc., that can be brought down to bare maintenance of the buffer stock. Rest of it can all be some kind of a public-private partnership where the poorest will be getting a voucher, and this will be more efficient. And similar vouchers can be given for any number of other things. So your mechanism of transferring to the poorest of the poor will become more efficient and effective. And second similar option, and there could be many more,
Okay.
I just want to point to here, is critical experience from Brazil. The conditional cash transfer intervention that Brazil made phenomenally and successfully, which even our neighbors like Bangladesh have implemented truly effectively. I think we need to take lessons from there. Conditional cash transfer can be another critical method of bringing down your usurious administrative expenditure on institutions like FCI, etc., and the fiscal pressure and the borrowing that we have been observing, lakhs of crores of borrowing by, say, Food Corporation of India, etc., and the fiscal pressure that it is putting on us. I think all of that can be brought down, and the poorest will be getting better support rather than otherwise.
Okay. Subhomoy, your views there on these, aspects of how to go about, and quite interesting suggestions coming in there from Professor Mohan. And they, if implemented, would obviously, there must be other such suggestions as well from other experts. But the question here is how to go about it. What's the best way to move forward?
Vishal, I'm again saying it, that the way to do subsidy reforms is, I'll agree, is fairly easy. But it is not for nothing that governments over the years have had trouble in trying to do subsidy reforms. I mean, Rajya Sabha itself has on several times carried programs, detailed programs on subsidy reforms.
Indeed.
And it shows that it's not that easy when you say that it won't do it. And I say it is basically a political issue. And political because it's often not easy to understand. Let me give an example. Bontek Singh Ahluwalia once had said that when you say that we want to make fertilizer subsidy more efficient, what farmers would say is that we don't want that. We want the MSP to be raised. Mm-hmm. We want more subsidy, more water, more free water. It's a question of there's a lot that's there in terms of communication which comes along, and you can't say that just by passing an order you can do the subsidy reforms.
But Subhomoy, if you have to look at the economics of subsidy reforms, and that's something which Professor Mohan is also pointing out. The fact that it is indeed very crucial, and this fact has been there for quite a few years, quite a few decades now. It has been talked about, it has been discussed. Of course, what you're pointing out is also really, really important. The will political will to go ahead and take that decision. But if you have to understand the economic aspect of it, what's the best way to move ahead?
That's what I'm saying, that given the constraints, I would say respective governments, and especially this government, has been successful in taking out subsidy on, say, petroleum, the POL. In fact, one of the reasons why you see the prices now moving up and down, rather more than down, is because of the fact that there's no subsidy there. So that has been a huge change that the government has brought in the petroleum sector. And it used to cost us something like a 1 lakh crore per year. And that has been cut down to actually almost nil. So there has been a huge subsidy reform that has been done. On food subsidy, I am again saying that given the National Food Security Act clearly says, the Act itself says that rice will be given at rupees 3 a kilo, the wheat will be given at rupees 2 a kilo to people, restricts the capacity of any government short of changing that Act to make out subsidy reforms. This must be understood.
Okay.
Second, the third point is on education and on health. No political party objects to it. But education and health is essentially a state subject. Every state has its own way of looking at how to reform education and how to reform health. In the constitutional scheme of things, these are not central government subjects. Central government can only give money and an overall policy. But changing the educational outcome is an outcome of the state governments. It is not left to the center to decide. This has to be understood. So whatever reforms has to be happening. So if Tamil Nadu today picks up a particular piece of educational reform, that may not be picked up by Maharashtra, or they may not be picked up by Assam. Similarly on health, the central government can send in oxygen, but central government cannot say that this is how health will be ensured to the last person on the street. So these need to be understood. Subsidy, yes, as I said, subsidy is a financial allocation that the center can do. And there, as I'm saying, that it has been done on petroleum. It has been done partially on fertilizer. It is being talked about that will be done, but it will have to be done carefully so that the message doesn't go out. And in this period, when you have farmers' agitation and all that sort of thing, that the message doesn't go out that the government is saying that we will raise fertilizer prices. No, the government is not saying that.
Indeed.
So that has to absolutely be very clear. What the government is saying is that the fertilizer as subsidy has to go to the farmers. But even there, you've noticed that in Punjab, when the government has done it, central government has done direct benefit transfer of agricultural produce, that the price MSP, for instance, the money is now going direct benefit transfer to the farmers. There was a blowback from the intermediate groups, trying to say the money should go through us. And it has been a major reform that has been done by the central government to ensure that the money goes to the farmers directly. So you see, so there are these things that have been done. And as I say, subsidy reforms is an extremely fraught affair, which has elements there. The one that I suspect will be done last will be the food subsidy, given the current situation.
Okay.
It is pretty difficult right now to even think that any change can be there on the subsidy issue, on the food issues.
Indeed, it is a very, very crucial issue, specifically subsidy reforms out there. And any reform is met with some or the other objection out there. Quick concluding comment from you, Professor Mohan, not only about the way forward, but the fact, as Subhomoy is pointing out, looks like that if we have to tackle this issue of subsidy reforms, then it's just not about the central government. The state governments will also have to work in tandem, because the other sectors which we're talking about, where this money saved will have to be spent, will have to be done by both center and state in tandem with each other.
See, I agree fully with Subhomoy when he says that this is a very difficult decision to make, and is more about politics. And we have seen of late, in last couple of months, the kind of politics around MSP and all that. So I fully agree that this is not this is truly, and that's why economics was often called political economy. This is how our ancestors used to look at this subject. And I think that truth remains today also. So there is a political issue and there is an economic issue. And I think all kind of reforms have similar challenges. We have done reforms in the past and we can do them now. So we have to find ways. I again agree with Subhomoy when he says that food subsidy will be the last. And particularly when we are looking at reform, there are two important things. One is the direction of change, other is timing of change. Here, I think timing is even more important than the direction of change. All of us agree that what the direction of change is. But as far as food subsidy is concerned, and given the current scenario, the pandemic kind of situation, I think tinkering with food subsidy in particular will be a hugely inappropriate political intervention at this point of time. But here again, I will always want to believe that always try to look at the story of second generation reform. We initiated the first generation, second generation reforms remain incomplete. And when you bring in the larger reforms, many things which are individually not that much acceptable become acceptable. And another truth is that, fine, again, these are administrative issues that something is jurisdiction of the state government, another is jurisdiction of the central government. There are limitations as far as the federal structure are concerned. But end of the day, much of development expenditure is actually with the state governments. And lots of transfers happen from the union government to the states. For example, health, again, look at the kind of, whether it is Manrega, whether it is health, National Health Mission, all told, lakhs of crores of rupees are being actually spent by Government of India for a variety of such interventions which are happening at the state level. And the reformist story naturally cannot remain confined to the union government alone. States will have to partner, and that's what this government has been talking about time and again, that it is actually the federal partnership which will take things forward. And I think if we are looking at reforms of such critical nature as transforming the subsidy story, I think both the state government and the central government will have to join hand, and only then we'll be able to move forward.
Okay, indeed, that's the way forward there. Thank you so much, Professor Arvind, Mohan, and Subhomoy Bhattacharjee as well for your views and inputs on this very crucial aspect, the issue of subsidy reforms and current fiscal position. It is indeed a tough task, but a crucial one as well, as our experts were pointing out, and there has to be a way being found to go ahead and move with these reforms to ensure at the end of the day that the people of the country, the common citizen of the country, do get the benefit which they are entitled to. We'll come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching. Thank you.